The young and the restless spoilers shock. Audra Charles had always been a fighter, but now she found herself exhausted, her strength sapped by the relentless battle she was waging against Kyle Abbott and Claire Newman. The young couple had joined forces not only in love, but also in defiance, swearing to dismantle every scheme Audra threw in their path. She had expected Claire's innocence to make her pliable and Kyle's trust to make him weak, but together they had proven surprisingly formidable. Every maneuver she attempted seemed to crumble under their combined resolve, every calculated temptation she dangled before Kyle withered in the light of his devotion to Claire. The war Victor had set her upon was proving far more ruthless than she had anticipated, and though she fought with every ounce of her cunning, the cracks in her armor were beginning to show. Zalika Silver, who brought Audra's complex persona to life on screen, had hinted at this unraveling in recent interviews, suggesting that her character's struggle was about more than business or seduction. Audra's war with Kyle and Claire was stripping her bare, exposing vulnerabilities the audience had only glimpsed in fleeting moments. Beneath her polished exterior and calculated ambition was a woman haunted by loneliness, driven by desperation, and gnawed by a past she rarely acknowledged. While viewers expected her to clash directly with Victor Newman, she surprised everyone by stepping back from confrontation with the patriarch. For all her bravado, Audra never truly wanted to be Victor's enemy. She wanted his partnership, his respect, even his trust. It sounded foolish woe trusted Victor Newman, after all. But to Audra, it was not foolishness, it was survival. It was in one of the darkest nights of her life, when defeat pressed heavily on her shoulders and the threat of irrelevance loomed closer than ever, that Audra made her most daring move. She arranged a private meeting with Victor, not as a co-conspirator seeking instructions, but as a woman prepared to expose the truth of her soul. She approached him with no seductive glances, no calculated smirks, only the weariness of someone who had carried too many burdens alone. For the first time, she spoke to him not as an ally or rival, but as a daughter who had grown up without a father. Her voice trembled as she laid bare the truth of her childhood, how the absence of a father figure had shaped her, how every ruthless ambition she pursued was born of the hunger to never again feel powerless, abandoned, or unseen. Victor, ever the strategist, listened with suspicion at first, waiting for the manipulation hidden beneath her words. But Audra did not ask for money or power. Instead, she pulled from her bag a photograph, worn and creased by years of handling, and handed it to him with trembling fingers. "This is my mother," she whispered, and for the first time, Victor Newman's steel composure shattered. His eyes widened, his jaw clenched, and the color drained from his face. The photograph in his hands transported him back more than 35 years to a time when he had loved a woman with passion and tenderness, a time when he was not yet the legend of ruthless power he had become. He saw her face in the photo, unchanged by memory, and the ghost of that love swept through him like a gale. The recognition was immediate, undeniable. He looked at Audra, truly looked at her, and the pieces began to fall into place. Her determination, her intelligence, her fight all carried echoes of a woman he had once adored. His voice, usually so controlled, erupted in a shout of disbelief. "This is your mother," he demanded, though he already knew the answer. Audra nodded, her eyes filling with tears, and for the first time since she had entered Genoa City, she allowed herself to appear vulnerable, exposed, human. Victor's mind reeled. The woman in the photograph had been his lover decades earlier, a relationship that burned brightly before ending abruptly, circumstances tearing them apart though his heart had never fully let go. He had buried those memories beneath decades of battles, marriages, and empires, but the sight of her face ripped open old wounds. He remembered her laughter, the softness of her touch, the plans they had whispered in the quiet moments before reality dragged them apart. And now here was Audra, the daughter of that lost love, standing before him not as a schemer or a manipulator, but as living proof of what he had once cherished and lost. Shock gave way to a torrent of emotions Victor rarely allowed himself to feel. Regret surged through him, regret for the choices that had driven them apart, regret for the years lost, regret for never knowing that this woman had gone on to bear a child who might, by all accounts, be his. Was it possible? Could Audra Charles be his daughter? The possibility struck him like lightning, electrifying him with both fear and longing. His entire life, Victor had prided himself on control, on knowing every move, every threat, every alliance. But this revelation was something he had not anticipated, something that shook the foundation of his identity as deeply as any corporate betrayal ever had. Audra, for her part, had not planned for such an explosive reaction. She had revealed her truth not to manipulate him, but to show him why she sought his partnership, why she longed for his respect. She wanted him to understand that she was not simply another opportunist chasing power, but a woman who had grown up in shadows, who had built herself from nothing, who had always wondered about the missing half of her life. When Victor's face contorted with recognition, when his voice cracked in disbelief, she realized the storm she had unleashed was far greater than she imagined. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the pounding of Victor's heart. He could still remember the woman in that photograph with startling clarity, the way she looked at him, the way she believed in him, before the world had hardened him into the man he became. The possibility that she had been carrying his child when she walked away, that Audra might be the living remnant of that lost chapter, was almost too much to comprehend. He turned away, trying to mask the vulnerability clawing at his chest. But Audra saw it. For the first time, she had unsettled the great Victor Newman not with schemes or power plays, but with truth. What followed was not resolution, but a new and more dangerous tension. If Audra was indeed Victor's daughter, everything Chang'e War she had been fighting with Kyle and Claire, the alliances she had forged, the betrayals she had committed, all of it would be refrained by the blood tie she might share with the most powerful man in Genoa City. And if Victor chose to embrace her as family, the balance of power across Newman and Abbott dynasties would shift forever. But if he chose to deny her, to push her away, then she would remain what she had always been, an outsider, desperate for belonging, forced to carve her path through betrayal and ambition. Either way, the revelation set the stage for an upheaval no one in Genoa City could have foreseen. For Victor, it was a ghost from the past returning to demand acknowledgement. For Audra, it was the chance to finally claim an identity beyond the roles she had been forced to play. And for Claire and Kyle, it was yet another storm gathering on the horizon, one that could shatter their fragile happiness in ways they could not predict. Would you like me to push this storyline forward into the possibility that Audra might be Victor's daughter, examining DNA tests, family reactions, and how Claire and Kyle handle the fallout, keep it more ambiguous, with Victor and Audra circling one another in mistrust and suspicion? Sometimes the greatest revelations arrived not with the crash of thunder, but with the stillness of a single word, a single embrace, a single truth spoken aloud after decades of silence. When Victor Newman realized the photograph Audra Charles handed him belonged to the woman he had once loved more than 35 years ago, the pieces fell together in a way that made his chest tighten and his breath falter. For a man who had prided himself on controlling every variable, predicting every betrayal, and outmaneuvering every rival, this was the kind of miracle he had never anticipated. Audra was not just a manipulative ally or a desperate schemer clawing for relevance. She was blood. She was his daughter. The acknowledgement of that truth came to him with shocking clarity, as though he had known it all along, but never allowed himself to see it. Victor stood frozen at first, the weight of memory colliding with the reality before him. He could see in Audra's face the shadows of her mother's shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the fiery determination that had once drawn him to her mother in a way no one else ever had. But beyond that, he saw himself reflected in her, the same stubborn pride, the same ruthless ambition, the same refusal to accept defeat. It was as if the past and present had merged in her, a living embodiment of a love he had once lost and a legacy he never knew existed. And for once, the great Victor Newman, who had outlasted enemies, empires, and time itself, found himself overwhelmed not by strategy, but by raw, unfiltered emotion. Audra had always been intelligent, cunning, and difficult to read, but in that moment, she did not gloat or scheme. She stood before him with an uncharacteristic calm, her eyes steady, her hands trembling only slightly as she accepted the silence that hung between them. Perhaps she had always suspected the truth. Perhaps she had orchestrated this revelation to strike him at his most vulnerable. Or perhaps she was as shocked as he was, discovering in real time that the man who had haunted her professional life was also the missing father she had spent her life wondering about. Whatever the case, Audra knew enough to remain still, to let the weight of the truth settle, to let Victor come to her on his own terms. Then, in a moment that would reverberate through the halls of Genoa City. Victor reached for her. The embrace was not tentative, but fierce, an outpouring of decades of regret and longing. He wrapped his arms around her, as if anchoring himself to the proof that love once lost could still echo in the present. He called her his daughter, the word breaking from his lips like a confession, like a vow, like a reclamation of something fate had tried to steal from him. For Audra, hearing it spoken aloud was both surreal and vindicating. She had spent her entire life searching for belonging, for a place where she was more than an outsider clawing for scraps. In that embrace, she felt for the first time what it meant to be claimed, to be part of something larger than herself, to be tethered to a legacy that could not be denied. The embrace unlocked a flood of secrets long buried. Victor spoke of her mother, of the love they had shared, of the dreams they had once dared to imagine before circumstances forced them apart. He confessed that he had never stopped remembering her, that even through marriages and affairs and wars fought across boardrooms and bedrooms alike, there had always been a part of him that lingered in that lost chapter of his youth. Audra listened, hungry for every word, piecing together the fragments of a history she had only ever known through the half-truths of her mother's silences. She heard in his voice not only the power of Victor Newman the Titan, but the vulnerability of Victor the man, flawed, passionate, human. But if this was a miracle, it was also a storm waiting to break. The revelation that Audra was Victor's daughter had the potential to shatter the balance of Genoa City in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. For one, it rewrote Audra's entire identity. No longer a mere interloper clawing for relevance, she was now a Newman, by blood if not by name, a direct heir to the empire Victor had built. The power that came with that identity was staggering. But so too were the expectations, the rivalries, the jealousies it would ignite. How would Victoria react, learning she had a half-sister? How would Nick, Adam, Abby, or Claire respond to the sudden appearance of a new Newman sibling, one whose cunning and ambition rivaled their own? And what of Kyle Abbott, who had already been entangled with Audra in dangerous liaisons of passion and betrayal? To know that she was now tied to Victor by blood would add fuel to fires already burning out of control. For Victor, the revelation carried its own risks. He had built his empire on loyalty and legacy, but his children were already fractured, divided by rivalries and resentment. To introduce Audra as his daughter would be to light a fuse under an already volatile family. And yet, he could not deny her, not when he saw so much of himself in her. In claiming her as his daughter, Victor was not only embracing the past, but rewriting the future, reshaping the family dynasty in ways no one could predict. The question lingered in the shadows. Had Audra known all along? Was this revelation part of a carefully crafted plan, a manipulation designed to secure her place in Victor's world? Or was she as much a victim of fate as he was, stumbling into a truth that redefined everything? The ambiguity hung heavy, for Audra's intelligence made it impossible to dismiss the possibility that she had orchestrated the timing, that she had chosen this exact moment when she was weakest. When she needed him, Mosto dropped the bombshell that would bind him to her forever. If so, it was the boldest play of her career, and perhaps the most effective. Yet even if it had been calculated, the emotion in her eyes as she embraced him could not be faked. She was many things: ambitious, manipulative, guarded, but she was also a woman who had grown up without a father, a woman who had carried the ache of that absence like a scar. To finally hear him call her daughter, to finally be acknowledged, was a wound beginning to heal in real time. Whatever calculations may have existed, the truth of her longing was undeniable. As the night wore on, father and daughter remained together, locked in a fragile new bond. Victor shared stories of battles won and lost, of the mistakes he had made, of the family he had tried to shape and the enemies who had tried to destroy him. Audra listened with rapt attention, absorbing the mythology of the Newman dynasty as if it were being passed down from king to heir. She realized then that her life was no longer defined by scraps of ambition or the fleeting power of alliances. She was Victor Newman's daughter, and that truth, whether discovered by accident or design, would change everything.